The Air Force Weapons Laboratory took a look at the image. They put it through a machine called a microdensometer. And what they discovered was that the image intensity varies in direct relationship to how far a given body part was away from the cloth. And again, that's consistent with it being irradiated onto the cloth. And they wanted to check their findings, and so they gave the picture, they gave the shroud image to an associate of theirs, Bill Modern, who put it in a machine called the VP8 image analyzer. Now, the VP8 image analyzer was designed to interpret image intensity in terms of adjustable levels of vertical relief. It was designed to look at space pictures and for medical equipment. And what they discovered when they put the picture of the shroud in the VP8 image analyzer is that it has three-dimensional properties. Now, that's something that no photograph has. We don't know how to do that. This is not reproducible. Okay, I mean, probably you might be able to reproduce this using that technique I just described, where you use a camera and use ultraviolet radiation. That might work, but we don't have any other natural means by which we can produce an image with three-dimensional properties. What that means is that, okay, the closer a body part is, like the nose, is going to give you a proportionally higher intensity image than the cheeks farther away. Look at the scar on the cheek. That has the wound on the cheek has greater intensity than the cheek itself, but less than the nose. And you see this perfect correlation. Whereas if you take a look at Garlischelli's image, the cheeks shoot out past the nose. Okay, you can't get any proportionality out of it. All right, so what that means is that the image, here's a picture of a photograph in a VP8 image analyzer. It does not have three-dimensional properties. What that tells us is that the image had to have been radiated onto the cloth. So it verifies that for us. Okay? And I talked about the fact that John Heller, in his book, which one of these books is Heller's? It's called Report on the Shroud of Turin. He describes that probably one of the best experiments that they did is where they digested away the blood to see what was underneath it, because we noticed that the image itself only penetrates 125 1,000th of a millimeter into the cloth. The image, it didn't go, but and also it's not under the blood. It's not under the blood. And so the blood was enough to stop whatever the radiative process was. And so again, that tells us that the blood was there first, and then the image was created around it. Okay, now how did you do that? And again, this is where Dr. Carter was involved. He demonstrated that if, let's say for example, you had somebody who was a uranium miner. Well, that's kind of goofy because they didn't mine uranium back then. Okay, so what if he was near a cave that had uranium in it, and he ate lots of food that was high in uranium, and then he dies? If you eat enough naturally occurring radioactive substances, can your body become so radioactive that it would produce a scorch on a cloth? Now, the reason that we thought that might be possible was because, look, the resolution is very high. That suggests radiation. Take a look. If you take a look at the fingers of the man in the shroud, notice how long those fingers look. It looks as though wherever the skin is close to the bone, you can actually see the bone images. You see that possibly in the cheeks, and you see it in the fingers. Okay? So that makes us think, you know what? If this whole body is giving off radiation, you would get stronger impressions from bone images, and maybe that's what we're seeing here. The problem with that theory of naturally occurring radioactive substances producing an image like this is that even if the body were saturated with uranium, according to Carter's calculations, it would take over 100 years of exposure before you would see even the faintest image. And the body of the man in the shroud does not show any type of decomposure consistent with being dead for 100 years. Okay, so that's that. So it doesn't appear to be naturally occurring. So what can do it? If it's not naturally occurring radiation, how do you get an image like we see on the shroud? Well, the best theory that I've seen so far is put forth by, it's from particle radiation, essentially. And this was published actually in Nature back in 1989 by Thomas Phillips and Eberhard Linder. And what they suggested was that the image on the Shroud of Turin is consistent with the process called thermal neutron flux. Now, what is thermal neutron flux? Essentially, whenever you think about the Bohr model of the atom, you have the protons and the neutrons and the electrons. You got your electrons bouncing around there in the outer shells, and then you have protons and neutrons in your nucleus. What would happen if suddenly your protons vanished? Yeah, the electrons would scatter. What's holding the electrons in orbit is basically they're attracted to the protons. The electrons would scatter. That's what thermal neutron flux is. It's the scatter. It's the energetic scatter that you get from the electron dispersal. And so that's the theory. What if the body in this shroud suddenly underwent such a vanishing and the proton suddenly vanished into another dimension or just went bye-bye, if that happened, then the dispersal of the electrons would give you a low energy radiation signal that is consistent with what we see on the shroud. Now, can we produce this? It's a nice theory. There's no way we can produce this with a natural mechanism. We can do thermal neutron flux, but it kind of requires sophisticated, expensive equipment. They probably didn't have it back then, okay? And we don't know how to do it to a whole body either. But that's the best that we've got. We don't have a natural mechanism to explain this image. All right? So there you have it. That's kind of where we're at. I mean, there's a lot more information, and I'll try to post some of the newer stuff on the website. There are many people out there who are a lot more up to date than I am. I mean, I've not been in this for many years. I still talk about it, but a lot of this stuff is probably dated. The information is still sound. I mean, none of that has changed. But when you understand how strong this evidence is, and when you get an idea as to, does this support the resurrection? It absolutely supports the resurrection. Does it prove the resurrection? You can't prove a resurrection. I mean, in order to prove something like that, you need somebody else to resurrect and then take a look at their, we don't have anybody else that does it, so we have no controls for resurrection. All we can say is that this is certainly consistent with what we might expect to see if somebody were to vanish. It makes sense, but no, we can't prove it. It's still a matter of faith. However, it is very, very, very consistent with the idea of the resurrection. And I think, yes, it does provide evidence for something supernatural, something like resurrection. I don't think that's a big stretch. Yeah.